Hello guys, welcome to my channel Lucid Fanfic, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. The morning sun shines through the large glass windows of the Class 1A room. Shota Aizawa, wrapped in thick white medical bandages, limps to the teaching podium. Aizawa-sensei, you should be resting in a hospital bed, Tenya Ida says, standing up so fast his chair scrapes the floor. You were hurt badly by that monster. I'm not here to teach, Aizawa says, his voice rough and tired. A new teacher will take over my class while I heal. Try not to give him a hard time. Oh, Shota Aizawa. Little did you know that it's going to be the opposite. A tall man in an expensive suit with gold engravings walks in, followed by a woman in a gray uniform. The man smiles warmly and puts his hands in his pockets. Hello, students, the man says. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I will be your teacher for now. This woman beside me is my wife, Lute. Izuku Midoriya. Lute. Don't get too comfortable, Lute says, her eyes sharp and angry as she glares at the teenagers. I'm not here to be your friend. Since I already know everyone's quirk, mine is called adaptive immortality. Izuku says clearly. My body stopped aging in my prime and heals at a molecular level. If I am burned, I heal and become flame-resistant, gaining a weaker version of that fire to use myself. And by the way, I'm old, very, very old. Izuku did a teehee expression playfully. What kind of boring power is that? Katsuki Bakugo yells, slamming his hands on his desk. You just take hits. You're basically quirkless with a power that isn't even flashy. Why should we listen to a punching bag? Lute's face turns red. She grabs the handle of her sword, pulling the metal blade out halfway with a sharp ring. You little brat. I'll take your head for that. Lute yelled. Don't, Izuku says, his tone flat and calm as he touches her arm. They're just students, and that one doesn't realize how far below in the food chain he is. Yes, dear, Lute says softly, clicking her sword back into its cover. If you think I'm just a punching bag, young man, come here, Izuku says to Bakugo. Land a hit on me. Use your strongest attack. Bakugo lunges forward and blasts Izuku with a massive explosion. When the smoke clears, Izuku's suit and skin are perfectly clean. He raises his hand, and small orange sparks pop from his palm. Take your seat. Thanks for the quirk, by the way. Izuku says. He presses a button on a remote, and a nearby robot folds itself into a soft mechanical chair. He sits down, and Lute climbs on his lap, resting her head on his shoulder. Stand up, everyone, Izuku says softly. The students stand. Suddenly, a thick, dark feeling of killing intent explodes from Izuku. The air turns to lead. Mineta, Kaminari, and Ishido hit the floor instantly. Those who fell have failed the first part, Izuku says, his voice turning cold. He triples the pressure. Bakugo, Todoroki, and Ida grit their teeth until their knees hit the wood with a loud thud. Even Aizawa slides down the wall into a kneeling position, gasping for air. Only Lute remains peaceful on his lap. Izuku pulls the pressure back, and the air becomes light again. Look at you all, Lute spits, looking at the gasping students. A bunch of chickens. You want to be heroes? You can't even handle a bit of pressure without crying on the floor like babies. Absolutely pathetic. You're all weak, and you should be ashamed to breathe the same air as my husband. Whoa, calm down, Lute. And you students, my test was not about your quirks, Izuku says, rubbing Lute's arm to calm her. It was about standing your ground when death stares you in the face. Most of you failed. Now, who wants to tell me why you deserve to stay in this room? I want to stay down, Bakugo pants, shaking as he tries to stand up again. Huh. You remind me so much of a little twerp I know in the past, Izuku says with a small smile and pointed at Shoto Todoroki. All right, your dad is such a dreamer. This ticks Shoto Todoroki off the wrong way, and Izuku knew that. Izuku stands in the center of the training room. He looks down at the floor and blinks his eyes slowly. A messy pile of UA women's gym uniforms and school skirts lies in a heap on the concrete ground. He tilts his head, his messy green hair falling over his diamond freckles. I have seen many strange things in my centuries of life, Izuku says, his voice full of calm sarcasm. But usually, people keep their clothes on during a fight. Is this a new hero tactic? Or did someone just forget how a laundry basket works? Lute walks over to the pile of clothes. She kicks a folded skirt with the toe of her heavy boot. She looks at the students and sneers. What is this? Lute yells, her voice echoing off the walls. Which one of you little twerps thought stripping in the middle of a goddamn test was a plan? You're a bunch of perverted ones. Suddenly, the air next to Izuku's face ripples. A hand that no one can see swings through the air in a sharp, horizontal motion. It is aimed directly at Izuku's cheek for a loud, stinging slap. Izuku does not flinch. He simply moves his upper body back by 2 inches. The invisible hand misses his skin by the width of a piece of paper. The wind from the swing ruffles his green hair. Oh, very well done, Izuku says, his voice smooth and full of charisma. But your speed, your breathing, and even your heartbeat is too loud for stealth. How did you see me? A girl's voice asks from the empty air. It is Toru Hagakure. She sounds completely shocked and out of breath. I did not see you, Izuku says, turning his head to look exactly where her face should be. I heard the vital fluid moving through your veins. I felt the heat coming off your skin. To an immortal, being invisible is just like wearing a very thin coat. It does not hide the fact that you are there. Lute steps forward, raising her silver sword. She points the sharp tip at the empty space where the voice came from. Her face is twisted with rage. You think you're clever, don't you? Lute snarls at the invisible girl. Trying to slap my husband while you're butt naked? You're a low-class woman. If you try that thing again, I'll carve my name into your invisible goddamn chest. Lute, calm down, she's still a teenager. Remember, you can only kill villains. Izuku says, patting her shoulder. One more thing. She is the only one who actually tried to use a brain cell today. The rest of them just want to blow things up like idiots. I don't care. Lute shouts, looking back at the rest of the class. The rest of you are just standing there like a bunch of brainless idiots. Do something, or I'll start cutting limbs off. Izuku looks toward the rest of the class. Bakugo is still panting, his hands smoking. Todoroki is standing with his arms crossed, his face tight with frustration. You all rely on your eyes too much, Izuku says, his tone becoming a bit more serious but still casual. If I turn out the lights, most of you are just targets. This girl understood that. She removed her clothes to hide, even if it was a bit messy. It's embarrassing. Hagakure's voice cries out, sounding muffled as if she is, covering her face. Being dead is also embarrassing, Izuku says with a sharp, sarcastic grin. At least this way you're still breathing. Now pick up your clothes. We are moving to the next part of the lesson. Izuku reaches into his suit pocket and pulls out a small gold coin. He flips it into the air with his thumb. The coin spins, catching the light from the ceiling. If any of you can catch this coin before it hits the ground, Izuku says, I will stop the killing intent for the rest of the day. If you fail, Lute gets to pick which one of you she gets to beat the life out of next. Lute licks her lips and points her sword at the class. Run, you little twerps, she says with a dark, hungry laugh. The gold coin hits the floor with a tiny, sharp metallic ring. Not a single student moved fast enough to catch it. They all stand frozen, staring at the small piece of metal as it spins on the cold concrete. Time is up, Izuku says, his voice smooth and calm. You all failed to catch a simple coin. That is very disappointing. We were too busy watching your crazy wife. Bakugo yells, pointing a shaking finger at Lute. Lute sneers and steps forward, her boots clicking loudly. She raises her silver sword and points it at Bakugo's throat. Shut your mouth, you little exploding thing, Lute says, her eyes burning with rage. You fail because you're slow and stupid. Don't blame me for your own pathetic weakness. Izuku reaches into his suit jacket. He pulls out a heavy, gray rectangular block. It has several wires sticking out of the top and a digital timer that is blinking with bright red numbers. The numbers are counting down fast. Think quick, Izuku shouts. He throws the heavy block directly at the group of students. The C4 bomb flies through the air, tumbling end over end. Is that a bomb? Kaminari screams, tripping over his own feet as he tries to run away. Get back. Everyone get back. Ida yells, waving his arms wildly to push his classmates toward the exit. Momo Yaoyorozu steps forward. Her face is pale and covered in sweat, but her hands are moving fast. She pulls her sleeves back. A thick, heavy gray fabric begins to grow from her skin. It is a lead-lined containment cloak. She throws the heavy fabric over the ticking bomb the second it hits the floor. Kirishima. Now! Momo screams at the top of her lungs. Eijiro Kirishima does not hesitate. He clenches his fists, and his skin turns into jagged, hard rock. He jumps high into the air and slams his heavy body down onto the cloak, pinning the bomb to the floor with all his weight. I've got it, Kirishima grunts, squeezing his eyes shut as he waits for the explosion to rip through him. The room stays silent. There is no loud bang. There is no fire. There's only the sound of the students breathing heavily and the soft whirring of the robot chair behind Izuku. Izuku starts to clap his hands slowly. He has a wide, sarcastic grin on his face. Very good, Izuku says. You actually worked together for 3 whole seconds. It only took the threat of blowing up to make you useful. Kirishima opens one eye. He reaches under the cloak and pulls out the gray block. He looks at the timer. The red numbers have stopped at 0, but nothing happened. He turns the block over in his hand. It's a piece of plastic, Kirishima says, his voice sounding hollow. It's just a fake toy with a clock on it. Lute lets out a loud, mocking laugh. She sheathes her sword with a sharp click. Look at your faces. Lute cackles, doubling over. You all look like you were about to wet your pants. You're a bunch of cowards. Aizawa is still leaning against the wall. He covers his eyes with one bandaged hand and lets out a long, shaky breath. He looks at the ceiling, wondering how his day turned into this. I used to think I was the toughest teacher at this school, Aizawa mutters to himself. His voice is full of genuine shock. I thought my training was a living hell. But compared to this guy, I am practically running a daycare. This isn't teaching. This is just psychological torture. Aizawa looks over at Izuku, who is calmly adjusting his gold cufflinks. He isn't a teacher, Aizawa whispers, his eyes narrowing in fear. He is the devil. I have brought a literal devil into my classroom. Izuku looks over at Aizawa and winks. He knows exactly what the hero is thinking. Don't be so dramatic, Shota, Izuku says with a charismatic smile. They didn't die. That is a successful lesson in my book. You threw a fake bomb at children. Aizawa yells, his voice cracking. And they stopped it, Izuku says, turning back to the class. Now, pick up that plastic trash and get back in line. We're just getting started. Almost all the students in the room had one thing in mind. I'm dropping out. The devil is teaching us. The morning sun shines through the classroom windows once more. Shota Aizawa sits in the corner of the room on a stool, his bandaged arms resting on his lap. It looks like he has not slept at all. Izuku Midoriya stands behind the podium, his green hair perfectly messy. He wears a new black suit with even more intricate gold engravings on the lapels. Everyone raise your right hand, Izuku says, his voice smooth and full of charisma. Do not ask why. Just lift them into the air. The students look at each other with confused faces. Slowly, one by one, they lift their hands. Their fingers twitch with nerves. Good, Izuku says, his eyes scanning the room. He points a finger at the middle row. Denki Kaminari, you are the one. Keep your hand up. Everyone else may lower theirs. Kaminari gulps loudly. He keeps his hand shaking in the air. Yes, sensei? What is the question? Here is your choice, Izuku says, leaning forward on the podium. You are in a street. A villain is about to kill 10 innocent people. You have a clear shot. If you kill the villain, the people live. If you hesitate, they die. Would you pull the trigger and end that villain's life? The room becomes deathly quiet. Kaminari's jaw drops open. He looks at his classmates, his eyes darting back and forth. Kaminari stammers. He rubs the back of his neck with his free hand. I mean, we are heroes. We're supposed to capture them, right? I think I would try to disable him. Or, wait for backup. Kaminari answered, still somewhat thinking about what he'll add. The people are dying in 3 seconds. Denki, Izuku says with a sarcastic tilt of his head. Backup is stuck in traffic. Think fast. Yes or no? Behind Kaminari, Uraraka whispers to Ida, Why is he asking something so dark? We are only first-year students. Is a test of resolve. Ida whispers back, his face pale. But it feels like he is trapping us. Kaminari stays silent for a full minute. His brain seems to be short-circuiting without him even using his quirk. Lute, who is leaning against the chalkboard with her arms crossed, finally loses her patience. She marches forward, her heavy boots making a thunderous thwack on the floor. She stops right in front of Kaminari's desk and slams her hand down on the wood. Give me a break. Lute snarls, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. You killed a piece of trash. It is not a hard math problem, you brainless worm. Kaminari flinches, sinking deep into his chair. But everyone deserves a chance to. Kaminari starts to say, no, they don't. Lute shouts, her eyes burning with unremorseful fire. You choose the lives of the innocent every single time. These villains have had their entire lives to be something other than a waste of oxygen, and yet they chose to be monsters. They are sinners. When they get to hell, they belong on the tip of a spear. She scoffs and turns her head to look at the rest of the class, her lip curling in disgust. Maybe in hell that delusional blonde woman and her pathetic hotel would try to reform them, Lute says, rolling her eyes. But here, in the real world, you put them in the ground so they stop breathing the air that belongs to better people. If you can't make that choice, you aren't heroes. You're just targets waiting to happen. You're all just fragile little meat sacks. Izuku watches Lute with a calm, amused expression. He taps his gold pen against the podium. She has a very blunt way of putting it, Izuku says, his voice flowing back into a casual tone. But she's right about your awareness. You're so worried about the rules that you forgot the people bleeding on the sidewalk. That hesitation is what gets you killed. Aizawa closes his eyes and leans his head against the wall. I think my daycare was definitely heaven, Aizawa mutters under his breath. This man is literally teaching them how to be executioners before lunch break. Izuku smiles at Aizawa, his eyes full of all-knowing mischief. They need to grow up, Shota, Izuku says. Now, Denki, since you took too long to answer, Lute gets to take you to the gym for reflex training. Good luck. Lute grins and grabs Kaminari by the collar of his uniform. Let's go bottom feeder. Time to see if he can outrun a spear, said Lute before dragging away a screaming Kaminari who prays to every god he knows. The classroom buzzes with the sound of low whispers as the door slams shut behind Lute and a terrified Kaminari. Izuku leans back against the teacher's podium. He pulls a sleek, gold-trimmed smartphone from his suit pocket. His thumb slides across the glass screen with a soft, rhythmic sound. He ignores the room, focused entirely on his device, his messy green hair catching the light as he tilts his head. I cannot believe he just sent Denki to be hunted by that woman, Mina, Ashido whispers, leaning over her desk towards Azui. She looked like she actually wanted to stab him. It is very unheroic, Karo, Thew says, her finger on her chin. But Izuku-sensei is right about one thing. We all froze when he asked that question. We were too slow. She added, it's not just about being slow. Achiko Uraraka says, her voice trembling slightly. He's talking about killing people like it's a chore. That is not what we were taught at UA. Tenya Ida chops his arms through the air in a stiff motion. The morality of the situation is highly questionable. We are students, not soldiers. Izuku chuckles softly, his eyes never leaving his phone screen. You're talking loud enough for the dead to hear you, students. If you have a complaint about my methods, feel free to tell Lute when she gets back. I am sure she will listen with her sword. Izuku spat, clearly appalled by their naivety. The class goes silent instantly. The sound of Izuku's thumb tapping on his phone is the only noise in the room. Aizawa shifts on his stool in the corner. He lets out a dry, raspy cough that makes his bandaged chest heave. He looks at the rows of teenagers with his one visible, tired eye. Listen to me, Aizawa says, his voice cutting through the tension. On your first day, during the quirk test, I told you that the world is not fair. I told you that heroes have to deal with the irrational every day. You think this is harsh? The villains at the USJ didn't ask you for permission to break your bones. If you stay this naive, you will be nothing more than a body for me to identify in a morgue. Izuku finally locks his phone and slides it into his pocket with a charismatic flick of his wrist. He walks around the podium, his expensive shoes clicking slowly on the floor. He stops in front of the front row, looking down at them with a gaze that feels older than the building itself. Shota is right, but he is also being polite, Izuku says, his voice dropping into a low, serious tone. You look at me and see a man in a fancy suit. You look at loot and see a monster. But you have no idea how much vital fluid I have spilled just so people like you could see peace. I have spent centuries treading in the gray area between hero and villain. Izuku reaches out and straightens a pencil on a student's desk. His fingers are steady and calm. I knowingly took a step into the dark so that the light could exist for everyone else. Izuku continues, his charisma replaced by a heavy, cold weight. I did the things that made me a villain in some eyes, just so no more families would have to lose their loved ones to the monsters I put in the dirt. I don't care if you like my methods. I care that you go home to your parents at night. The students stare at him, completely frozen. Even Bakugo remains quiet, his eyes wide as he listens to the weight of the man's words. The devil is right, Aizawa mutters, looking back at his class. Listen to him. Learn his ways. If you don't, the first real villain you meet will be the last thing you ever see because you were too busy wondering if it was right to stop them. Izuku stands up straight and smooths out the front of his expensive suit. He smiles at the class, a look that is both warm and incredibly dangerous. Now stop gossiping like schoolgirls and get your gear, Izuku says, the sarcasm returning to his voice. We are going to the gym to watch Denki try not to become a kebab. Move it, you little meat sacks, Aizawa adds, closing his eyes. Before I let him use his killing intent on you again. The students scramble out of their seats. The sound of shuffling feet and sliding chairs fills the room as they rush toward the door. The classroom door slides shut with a final wooden click. The sounds of the students' nervous chattering and Aizawa's heavy, dragging footsteps fade away down the hallway. Izuku remains standing by the podium, the room now perfectly still and silent. He reaches up and slowly adjusts the solid gold engraving on his collar, his fingers moving with practiced precision. He walks over to the large glass windows. He places one hand against the cool surface of the pane and looks out at the sprawling UA campus below. He watches the tiny figures of his students walking toward the gymnasium, their movements still hesitant and full of youth. Still so naive, Izuku says to the empty room. His voice is a low, dry whisper that barely carries in the quiet air. They move as if the ground under their feet is solid. They think the world has a bottom. He lets out a soft, sarcastic huff of breath that leaves a tiny circle of fog on the glass. He watches the fog disappear as quickly as it formed. They are too good-natured, Izuku continues, shaking his head slowly. They look for the light in everything because they have never been forced to stare into the darkness. They see a villain with a mask and think they have seen a monster. They don't know the demons that are actually in hell. He turns away from the window and walks slowly between the rows of empty desks. He stops at the desk where Kaminari sat just moments ago. He runs a finger along the smooth wood. Maybe someone like Charlie Morningstar can afford to see the good in everyone, Izuku says with a sharp, humorless smile. She can spend her days dreaming of redemption and singing about sunshine. But she has a father who is the king of hell to protect her from the consequences of her kindness. He looks at the door where his students disappeared. He lets his hand fall to his side. These children do not have a king to shield them, Izuku says, his voice growing cold. They only have themselves and a world that wants to chew them up. If I don't toughen them up, if I don't burn that softness out of them now, they will be slaughtered by the first thing that doesn't care about their feelings. He pushes off the desk and walks toward the door. His leather shoes make a sharp, lonely sound against the floor. Reality isn't a classroom, Izuku mutters, his hand gripping the door handle. And I'm the only one here who knows that the monsters don't always stay in the basement. He slides the door open and steps into the hallway, his face settling back into a calm, charismatic mask. The world isn't fair. Not everyone would be nice and good-natured. It's time these students open their eyes. The gymnasium is filled with the sharp, echoing sound of Lute's heavy boots hitting the polished floor. She moves like a blur of gray and white, her long silver spear whistling through the air. Denki Kaminari scrambles backward, his sneakers squeaking loudly as he trips over his own feet. "Move, you useless pile of static." Lute screams, her voice bouncing off the high ceiling. She thrusts the spear forward. The sharp tip stops exactly 1 inch away from Kaminari's throat. The boy let out a high-pitched yelp and scrambled to the left. Lute does not touch him, but she makes sure he feels the wind from every swing. She narrows her eyes, her face twisted in a scary grin as she hunts him across the open floor. "Is that all you got?" Lute yells, swinging the butt of the spear near his ankles. "A toddler moves faster than you. I'm going to poke your eyes out if you don't start using your brain." Izuku stands by the gym entrance, his arms crossed over his black suit. He watches the training with a wide, charismatic smile. He looks perfectly relaxed, his messy green hair unmoving as he leans against a metal equipment rack. "She's holding back quite a lot today," Izuku says to the air, his voice full of calm sarcasm. "She must be in a good mood. Usually, there's more vital fluid on the floor by now." "Kaminari, watch your left." Achiko Uraraka shouts from the sidelines, her hands cupped around her mouth. "Please, just dodge properly. She's going to hit you. Keep your eyes on the spear, Denki." Mina Ashido cries out, her pink skin turning a shade paler from worry. "Don't trip again." Hagakure added, "Bro dodge. She's above you." Kirishima yelled at his friend, and Kaminari dodged by hair length. The spear almost took his head off. The girls of Class 1A huddle together, their faces full of genuine fear for their classmate. They flinch every time the silver spear flashes in the light. Katsuki Bakugo stands a few feet away from the girls. He does not shout. He keeps his arms crossed tightly, his red eyes narrowed into thin slits. He watches the way Lute moves, his teeth gritted so hard his jaw muscles bulge. He is not worried. He is calculating, his chest heaving as he watches a power that does not care about flashy explosions. Aizawa sits on a nearby wooden bench, his bandaged head resting in his hands. He lets out a long, defeated sigh that sounds like a whistle through his teeth. "They are actually doing it," Aizawa mutters to himself, his voice muffled by the medical wraps. "I brought them here to learn how to save people, and now I'm watching them get hunted like animals in a cage." He looks up, watching Kaminari dive headfirst into a gym mat to avoid a thrust that would have taken his ear off. "They are in for the hell of their lives," Aizawa says, shaking his head slowly. "I can't stop it. If I try to step in, that woman will probably try to skin me, and Midoriya will just watch and make a joke about it." Izuku glances over at Aizawa and chuckles. "Don't be so gloomy, Shota. Look at him move. He has never been this fast in his entire life. Fear is a wonderful teacher." "You're a monster, Midoriya," Aizawa says, his voice flat. "I prefer the term experienced, a centuries old and all." Izuku says, turning his eyes back to the hunt. "Lute, give him 5 more minutes. If he doesn't use his quirk to parry, start taking off some skin." "Got it, dear." Lute screams back, her laugh sounding like a jagged piece of glass. Lute stops her chase for a split second. She looks over at Izuku, who is leaning casually against the equipment rack with his hands in his pockets. A wicked, playful grin spreads across her face. She shifts her grip on the heavy silver spear, her knuckles popping with a sharp sound. "Hey, Izuku, catch!" Lute screams. She spins her body in a powerful circle and hurls the spear with a thunderous crack of broken air. The weapon flies across the gymnasium like a streak of lightning. Kaminari drops to his knees, the wind from the throw nearly knocking him over. Izuku doesn't move. He just stands there and lets out a long, bored sigh. The spear hits him square in the center of his chest. The metal blade tears through his black designer vest and sinks deep into his sternum with a wet, heavy thud. The force of the throw carries him backward, slamming his body into the concrete wall of the gymnasium. The spear embeds itself 3 inches into the stone, pinning Izuku to the wall like a butterfly in a display case. F. Izuku yells at the top of his lungs, his head snapping back against the concrete. "Well," Izuku sighed. The gymnasium goes deathly silent. Uraraka lets out a horrified scream, covering her mouth with both hands. Ida freezes, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Sensei!" Mina shrieks, her eyes filling with tears. He's dead. She just killed him." The students' faces turn dark and pale. Some of them fall to their knees, staring at the green-haired man hanging from the wall with a spear through his heart. Bakugo's eyes widen to the size of saucers, his hands trembling at his sides. Aizawa doesn't move from his bench. He doesn't even stand up. He just looks at the horrified teenagers and shakes his head slowly. "Relax," Aizawa says, his voice flat and tired. "Did you all forget what he told you yesterday? You really should listen when he explains his quirk. He isn't going to die from a toothpick like that." Izuku's head rolls forward. He looks down at the spear sticking out of his chest, and then looks over at Lute. A sharp, loud laugh bursts from his throat. "F you, Lute," Izuku shouts, vital fluid bubbling at the corner of his mouth before it instantly vanishes. Lute puts her hands on her hips and winks at him, her grin turning suggestive and sharp. "Sure, why not? What time and where are we doing it, dear? I'm free right after I finish traumatizing these little twerps." The students blink, their faces turning bright red. Minetta's jaw hits the floor, while Momo and Uraraka turn away, blushing furiously at the bluntness of the comment. Izuku reaches up and grabs the shaft of the spear with both hands. He grunts and pulls his body forward. The metal slides out of the wall and his chest with a sickening squelch. He drops to the floor, landing perfectly on his feet. As he stands up, the gaping hole in his chest closes in a blur of moving muscle and skin. In less than 2 seconds, his chest is perfectly smooth again. Not even a scar remains. "My suit," Izuku groans, looking down at the jagged hole in his expensive black fabric. "Do you have any idea how much this silk costs?" "It's a custom designer piece, Lute." "Oh, shut up," Lute says, waving a hand at him dismissively. "You're filthy rich. You'll live through losing one expensive suit. Buy 10 more tomorrow. Buy country while you're at it." "It's the principle of the thing," Izuku mutters, poking his finger through the hole in his ruined vest. He looks back at the class, his charismatic smirk returning as if he hadn't just been impaled. "Now, why are you all staring? The spear is out. The show is over. Get back to work before Lute decides to use one of you for target practice instead." Izuku nonchalantly pats his stained suit. The common room of the Class 1A dorms is filled with a heavy, contemplative silence. Denki Kaminari is sitting on the floor, his back leaning against a sofa. He is slowly turning a simple brass key in his hand, staring at the small, cheap metal object with a look of profound confusion. "I still don't get it," Kaminari mutters, his voice cracking slightly. "Lute-sensei almost poked my eyes out with that spear, and then I spent the rest of the gym period dodging. After everything, all she did was toss me this key and tell me not to lose it, because by her words, it's all you're worth. You pathetic maggot." "What does that even mean?" "It is most likely another one of their cryptic psychological tests," Tenya Ida says, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Midoriya-sensei is attempting to fracture our logical processes by forcing us to search for meaning in meaningless actions. It is a highly irregular and frankly concerning pedagogical method." Momoyosa lets out a long, slow sigh, her fingers idly smoothing out the expensive fabric of her school uniform. Ida is right. He's not teaching us. He's taking us apart. But the truly frightening thing is that Aizawa-sensei is just standing back and letting it happen. She said. The common room door slides open and Shota, Aizawa, walks in. He is moving slowly, his bandaged body still stiff, but he is at least out of his mummy wraps. He looks at his class, his expression as unreadable and tired as always. "Pack your gear," Aizawa says, his voice flat. "You have exactly 15 minutes to get on the bus. We're going to the new training facility on the other side of the campus." "A new facility?" Itsuka Kendo's voice cuts through the room as Class 1B files in from the hallway. "Since when did UA build another training ground? I thought the USJ was already the best." Izuku Midoriya steps out from behind Aizawa, smoothing down the front of a fresh, intricately engraved black suit. A playful, charismatic smile is plastered on his face. Since I paid for it, of course. UA has potential, but its equipment is practically archaic. I prefer my investments to have the highest standard of excellence. The students of both classes stare at him. Class 1B looks at him with cautious interest, while Class 1A flinches slightly, their eyes automatically darting toward the floor for any piles of discarded clothes. "Welcome, Class 1B," Izuku says, spreading his arms wide with theatrical flair. "And welcome back, Class 1A. Today, you will all get to experience my latest and greatest contribution to this institution. We are going to the cage facility. The bus ride is short and tense. Lute rides on the roof of the bus, occasionally making a loud, scratching sound with her spear just to make the students jump. When the large metal doors of the bus slide open, they're standing in front of a colossal, sprawling warehouse of polished gray concrete and sleek black metal. The entire building hums with an invisible, slightly sickening pressure. The front of the building is marked with a massive, stylized iron placard featuring 4 enormous, angular letters CG below each letter. A set of principles is carved deep into the metal. Izuku leads them to the heavy iron doors. Lute hops down from the roof and stands beside him, her face full of dark amusement as she watches the students look at the building. "This is not a hero simulation, kids," Lute says, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "This is where you learn how to survive when the rules go up in smoke. My husband spent a lot of money to make sure you useless meat sacks don't just die. Pay attention." Izuku wraps a gold-ringed knuckle against the C on the iron placard. He turns back to the students, his gaze older than the building behind him. "The cage is a system," Izuku says, his tone dropping from casual charisma to a serious heavyweight. "It is my final test output for you. And if you cannot follow these simple concepts, you will not just fail this class, you will fail at life. Read them, learn them, because I will not be treading into the dark again to save you from your own stupidity." The students gather around the placard, reading the principles that would dictate the hell they were about to enter. Core, master your mind. If you don't crack, the world won't either. Armor, be the shield. Your first job is to make sure everyone else gets home. Grit, never quit. When your system says stop, you keep going. Endurance, outlast the enemy. Be the last one standing every single time. "So," Kaminari whispers, looking up from the placard to the heavy steel doors. "Which one of us goes in first?" Lute pats the gold key at her belt and lets out a jagged laugh. "Both classes are going in together, you brainless peasant. Time to see which one of you is actually worth the barely expensive funding my husband provided that went into making this building." The heavy doors groan and begin to slowly slide open, revealing a wall of utter darkness within. "So students, let me make this official welcome to Cage," Izuku exclaimed with open arms. The heavy iron doors of the cage facility seal shut with a boom that vibrates through the students' very bones. The interior is a vast, open expanse of cold obsidian-colored flooring, lit only by dim, flickering amber lights high above. Vlad King stands beside Aizawa, both of them looking remarkably tense. A third figure joins them Midnight, who struts toward the group with her usual confident sway. She adjusts her mask and leans in close to Izuku, her eyes sparkling with mischief. My, Midoriya-sensei," Midnight purrs, her voice dripping with honey. "I heard you were expensive, but seeing you in person, you're a total treasure. Maybe you could show me some of that huge private funding later?" The air is instantly sliced by the whistle of cold steel. Lute's silver spear is at Midnight's throat before the hero can even blink, the sharp tip pressing just hard enough against her skin to leave a faint red mark. "Back off, you thirsty scan," Lute snarls, her wings twitching with violent intent. "Try flirting with my husband again, and I'll take your head off and use it as a goddamn paperweight. He's mine, you pathetic leather-clad beach." Midnight freezes, her hands raised, her playful smirk replaced by a look of genuine terror. Izuku doesn't even look up. He simply adjusts his gold watch and sighs. Lute put the toothpick away. "We have work to do," Izuku says calmly. He turns to the combined students of Class 1A and 1B, who are already trembling from the tension. Today we test the C. Your core. You all think you're strong because you have flashy quirks. You think you're ready because you fought some low-level thugs of the USJ. Izuku takes a single step forward. The gold engravings on his suit seem to glow with a sickly, dark light. You know nothing of the monsters I have buried, Izuku whispers. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room dies. It feels as if the oxygen has been replaced by liquid lead. A tidal wave of killing intent explodes from Izuku, thick with the concentrated malice of the hundreds of thousands of villains he has executed over the centuries. It isn't just pressure, it is a curse. The students don't just fall, they collapse. Bakugo, Todoroki, and Monoma hit the floor simultaneously, their knees slamming into the obsidian ground. They can't breathe. They can't even scream. As they struggle to remain conscious, the darkness of the room is replaced by vivid, agonizing flashes of memory, Izuku's memories. They're seeing the world through his eyes, hundreds of years in the past, when the quirk phenomenon first began. They see a city in flames, but there are no villains in costumes, only monsters. They see a man with a mutation quirk laughing as he crushes a child's skull for sport. They see a woman using her power to boil the blood of a screaming family while she mocks their pleas for mercy. These weren't people looking for fame or a better life. They were pure, unadulterated evil. In the memory, Izuku walks through the carnage. His face is younger, but his eyes are just as cold. You think you're a god because you can spark a little fire? The memory Izuku says to a villain standing over a pile of bodies. I'll kill you and everyone in this city. You can't stop me, you suit-wearing idiot. The villain screams, lunging forward. The students feel the sensation of Izuku's hand reaching out. They feel the sickening crunch as he snaps the villain's neck without a second thought. They see the life fade from the villain's eyes as Izuku whispers, then die like the dog you are. One by one, the memories flash by. First-person executions of the most depraved killers in history. The students are forced to experience the weight of every soul Izuku sent to the pit. Back in the cage, the students are sobbing, clawing at the floor, or vomiting from the sheer psychic weight. They are no longer heroes in training. They are terrified children facing the reality of a man who has lived in the mouth of hell. That is the world you want to enter, Izuku says, his voice cutting through the trauma like a blade. The villains of today are soft. The demons of the past are what built my core. If you cannot even stand in the shadow of my memories, then get out of my facility. Aizawa looks at his students, his own eyes watering from the pressure. This is what I meant, he gasps out. He's a devil to villains, the bigger fish in the vast ocean. Devil, huh? Izuku laughed. The words Aizawa described him was unappealing, so he arched his arm forward. I'm not, and conjured a magic circle, a pentagram colored by green hue. Come to me, old friend. Izuku's eyes glowed red. Your dinner is served. The green magic circle glowed brighter as the students see a figure being formed. Alaster. Izuku spoke. The green magic circle pulses with an unstable, rhythmic hum, sounding like the distorted feedback of a blown-out speaker. As the light intensifies, a tall, spindly silhouette rises from the pentagram. Shadows stretch across the obsidian floor like jagged claws, and the smell of ozone and rotting cedar fills the air. The figure fully materializes, leaning on a microphone cane. Alaster's wide, toothy grin glows in the dim amber light, his eyes flickering like radio dials. Why, Izuku? It's been a hot minute since you've called upon my particular brand of entertainment. Alaster's voice crackles with the sound of a cheering studio audience. Suddenly, a small, silver-haired girl pops out from behind Alaster's long red coat. She has tiny, feathered wings tucked against her back and a small black halo floating above her head. Eri, dressed in her favorite red pinafore, ignores the terrifying atmosphere of the cage entirely. Mama! Eri squeals, her little boots clicking against the obsidian floor as she sprints past the kneeling, terrified students. Lute's face instantly transforms. The murderous snarl vanishes, replaced by a look of pure, maternal adoration. She drops her spear, which vanishes before hitting the ground, and scoops Eri up into her arms. "There's my little angel," Lute chirps, peppering Eri's face with dozens of loud, dramatic kisses. "Were you being a good girl for Alaster? Did you eat your snack I packed for you?" Eri giggles, hugging Lute's neck tightly. "Yes. Alaster played the funny music and gave me an apple." The students of Class 1A and 1B stare in complete, brain-broken silence. Bakugo, who is just about to vomit from the killing intent, looks up with a twitching eye at the domestic scene happening 3 feet away from a radio demon. "She's a delight, as always. Young Master young Alaster says, teasing Izuku a little, his neck snapping with a series of sharp, metallic pops as he glides toward the group. Though I must say, her taste in bedtime stories is becoming quite macabre. She asked for the one about the soul-harvesting plague again." Izuku walks over, his expression softening as he ruffles Eri's hair. She takes after her mother. "Thanks for watching her, Alaster." He turns back to the students, his voice regaining its cold, sharp edge. "Eri, honey, go sit with Shota Aji and Vlad. Mama and Papa have to show these useless losers how to be brave." "Okay, Papa," Eri says sweetly. Lute sets her down, and the little girl skips over to a stunned Aizawa, waving at the students who are still clawing at the floor. "Good luck, everyone. Don't let the scary shadows catch you." Lute summons her spear back into her hand, her eyes snapping back into executioner mode as she looks at the classes. "You heard my baby," Lute snarls, the silver tip of her spear sparking. "Don't embarrass my daughter by crying like little beaches. Alaster, let's give them a reason to run." Alaster's grin stretches even wider, his shadow growing 20 feet tall. "With pleasure." Dear listeners, the broadcast is officially live. The obsidian floor beneath the students begins to liquefy into a sea of reaching, black hands. Lesson 1. Alaster's voice booms, now sounding like a distorted emergency broadcast. Don't let the shadows drag you into the pit. Stand up or become part of the scenery. Izuku ignores the chaos of the shadows for a moment. He raises his left hand, and with a sudden, sharp movement, he bites down hard on his index finger. The students who can still see through the dark gasp as bright crimson fluid begins to spill, dripping onto the obsidian floor. "Midoriya, what the hell are you doing?" Aizawa asks, his hand moving toward his capture scarf. This isn't the time for self-harm. Midnight's eyes widen as she watches the vital fluid. "Is that part of the test? Or have you finally lost your mind? Is it your quirk?" Izuku doesn't answer immediately. Instead, the droplets of vital fluid on the floor begin to hiss and bubble like boiling oil. The red liquid expands, rising from the ground and twisting into 3 distinct, human-shaped masses. Within seconds, it hardens and takes on color, forming 3 perfect copies of Izuku, right down to the gold rings and the intricately engraved black suits. The clones open their eyes, which glow with the same cold, ancient red as the original. "Recon," Izuku says, his voice flat and commanding. "I sense a disturbance near the perimeter. Find it." The 3 clones nod in perfect unison. "Understood," they say, their voices a haunting echo of Izuku's. Without another word, they vanish into the shadows of the facility. Izuku finally turns his gaze toward the teachers, his charismatic smile looking a bit sharper than usual. "Quirk, don't be ridiculous, little Namiri-chan. This is an ability I got from a deal I made centuries ago with the devil himself, Lucifer Morningstar. Blood for power is a very old, very effective contract." The air in the room seems to freeze. Aizawa's jaw tightens, and Vlad King actually stumbles back a step. The teachers look at each other, their faces a mask of profound, terrifying confusion. They had heard of powerful quirks, but deals with the devil were the ramblings of madmen, yet the 3 men that just sprinted away were very real. "Unwelcome guests," Izuku mutters, adjusting his sleeve and ignoring their stunned silence. "It seems some flies have decided to buzz around my investment. Shota, Vlad, keep an eye on the kids. I have trash to take out." Alastair lets out a distorted, static-filled cackle, twirling his microphone cane as the black hands from the floor begin to grab at the student's ankles. Oh, how exciting! A cameo from the big boss. Alastair shouts, the sound of a drum roll echoing through the cage. Focus, children. If you can't stand up before the count of 10, you'll find out exactly what's at the bottom of the floor. Eri sits on the bench next to Aizawa, swinging her legs happily while she holds a small bag of candy Alastair had produced from thin air. Go, go, everyone! Eri cheers, her sweet voice clashing with the sound of snapping bone and demonic jazz. If you don't stand up, the shadow monsters will give you tickles. And Alastair's tickles really hurt. Lute stands near the edge of the liquefying floor, her spear glowing with a violent silver light. You heard the princess. Move your bodies, or I'll help the shadows pull you down. But Kogo grits his teeth, his palms sparking as he tries to blast the black hands away. I'm not getting beaten by a goddamn radio. Tune your frequency a little bit, Kogo, and watch out for Alastair. He hates your type. You're usually the people he kills. The students looks at Izuku with an "Are you serious?" look. He's a demon. What do you children expect? Izuku nonchalantly enjoys the fear in their eyes. Outside the secondary perimeter of the cage, the air is thick with the smell of industrial exhaust and salt. Tamura Shigaraki stands before a massive, reinforced ventilation hub, his pale, scarred fingers twitching with anticipation. The hand on his face shifts as he exhales a dry, raspy breath. This is it, Shigaraki mutters, his voice like grinding stones. The map, Jiren leaked. This is the hidden cheat code to the tutorial level. The hero wannabes are playing house inside. He reaches out, placing all 5 fingers of his right hand against a 6-inch thick slab of reinforced cold-rolled iron. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then, the metal begins to groan. Spiderweb fractures erupt from his palm, turning the indestructible alloy into a brittle, gray powder that slumps to the ground like dead skin. A jagged, yawning hole now leads into the dark guts of the facility. Shigaraki turns his head slightly, his red eyes glinting with a bored, murderous light. Don't just stand there, you useless grunt NPCs, Shigaraki croaks at the small group of hooded subordinates behind him. The script says you go in first to draw out the aggro. Move. If I wanted to wait, I'd be playing a turn-based RPG. The low-level villains, terrified of the man who just disintegrated iron with a touch, scramble through the hole into the darkness. Level up, little heroes, Shigaraki whispers, stepping into the breach. I'm here to delete your save data. Can this man lock in for a moment and not sound like an overgrown Discord mod? The obsidian floor of the cage has become a churning ocean of ink. Alastair glides across the surface, his boots never actually touching the liquid shadow. He twirls his cane, sending arcs of red electricity snapping at the students' feet, not enough to stop a heart, but more than enough to make their muscles scream in protest. Keep those knees up, boys and girls. Alastair's voice crackles with a tinny cheer of a 1930s morning show. If you stop moving, the audience gets bored, and we simply can't have a dull broadcast. He's not even hitting us. Itsuka Kendo gasps, her enlarged fist smashing through a shadow hand that tried to drag her under. He's just playing with us. Playing? Perish the thought. Alastair's neck snaps 180 degrees to look at her, his grin stretching past his ears. I'm simply checking your expiration dates. You wouldn't want to be served rotten, would you? But Kogo lets out a guttural roar, his palms smoking. I'll give you an expiration date. You red-suited freak. Get down here and fight like a man. Oh, I'm far more than a man, loudmouth. Alastair laughs, the sound of canned hooting and hollering filling the room. And you're far less than a hero. Stand up, pivot, show me some grit, or I'll let the shadows have your tongue for a snack. Near the observation deck, Izuku stands perfectly still. His eyes are glazed, a sign that his consciousness is currently fractured across the facility. He suddenly blinks, his pupils focusing as he checks his gold watch. The rats have found the pantry, Izuku says calmly, his voice cutting through the demonic jazz. Aizawa's head snaps toward him. What did you say? Some creature and a handful of his grunts, Izuku says, his tone bored, as if he were discussing a weather report. They've breached the secondary perimeter through the ventilation hub. One of them looks like he hasn't discovered the concept of moisturizer in a decade. Izuku paused, taking one more look at Shigaraki through his clone. Truly a bum appearance. Chappy lips, unkempt light blue hair. He looks like he crawled out of a dumpster behind a discount salon. How quaint. We need to evacuate the students, Vlad King says, his hand going to the canisters at his belt. If villains are here. Sit down, Vlad, Izuku interrupts, his voice dropping an octave. You're paid to teach, not to panic. My clones are already handling the sanitation. In fact, Izuku tilts his head, listening to a frequency only he can hear. One of them just finished with the first wave. A mile away in the maintenance tunnels, a clone and exact, crimson-eyed replica of Izuku stands over a pile of what used to be 3 villains. The walls are painted in fresh, wet red. The clone wipes a stray drop of vital fluid from its cheek with a silk handkerchief. Rats exterminated, the clone says simply. It doesn't use complex words. Its voice is just a flat, chilling vibration. Moving to the next cluster. Tell the one with the crusty face to stay put. I'll be there to sweep him up shortly. Back in the cage, Midnight stares at Izuku, her face pale. You just killed them? Without a trial? Without even checking if they could be apprehended? They are intruders in a private facility, Izuku replies, his expression a mask of cold, aristocratic indifference. In my era, we didn't waste tax money on prisons for rabid dogs. We simply put them down. Your moral compass is pitch black. Midoriya, Aizawa snarls, his hair beginning to float as his quirk activates in sheer frustration. You're acting more like a villain than the ones you're killing. Izuku turns to Aizawa, a thin, sharp smile touching his lips. Morality is a luxury for those who don't have to hold back the tide. Shota, you keep your valor. Let's see how far that takes you away. Izuku with his grin looks at Aizawa. He knew the right buttons. Do I need to remind you of what happened to Shirokamo? Izuku didn't care about Aizawa's feelings. He only wanted to take his own ideals and slap it on Aizawa's face. Izuku gestures toward the arena, where Eri is clapping her hands as Todoroki finally manages to freeze a shadow minion solid. The children are learning, Izuku says softly. They are learning that the world doesn't care about their feelings. It only cares if they can stand when the devil tells them to sit. Papa, look, Eri shouts, pointing at the floor. The ice boy made a pretty statue. Very good. Eri, Izuku calls back, his voice warming instantly. Then, he looks back at the teachers, his eyes turning back into frozen chips of emerald. Don't look at me like that, Midnight. If you want to play hero, go out there and help them. But if you interfere with my clone's work, I'll consider you an obstacle to the facility's security. And I don't like obstacles. You're insane, Midnight whispers. And he has such wonderful taste in friends. Alastair interjects, appearing instantly beside the observation deck. Now, who's ready for round 2? I've decided the shadows need a bit more. Teeth. The heavy silence of the cage is finally broken by the sound of boots scraping against gravel and the wet, rhythmic slapping of the Noma's feet. From the jagged breach in the wall, Shigaraki emerges, flanked by his hooded NPCs. He scratches at his neck with a feverish intensity, his red eyes darting around the massive facility. Found the boss room, Shigaraki croaks, his voice cracking like dry parchment. All these high-level players in one spot. It's a perfect chance to crash the server. We're here to delete the symbol of peace, but killing a few tutorial brats first seems like a decent side quest. Izuku, standing on the observation deck with Eri perched on his shoulder, lets out a sharp, genuine bark of laughter. The sound is startling, echoing off the high ceilings and cutting through the students' mounting anxiety. A side quest? Boss rooms? Izuku shakes his head, his gold rings glinting as he gestures toward the blue-haired intruder. You're a child. You're a literal child playing with toys you don't understand, hiding behind metaphors because the real world is too heavy for you to carry. Shigaraki's scratching stops. He glares up at Izuku, his lip curling into a sneer. Shut up. You're just another brat in a fancy suit. You're the same age as me, maybe younger. You don't know anything about how this world is broken. Izuku's smile doesn't fade, it grows wider, colder, and infinitely more ancient. He sets Eri down gently on the bench next to Aizawa and takes a slow step toward the edge of the platform. Same age? Izuku's voice drops to a low, vibrating hum that makes the air feel thick. Listen to me, you crusty little insect. When your great-great-great-grandfather was nothing more than a perm in his daddy's bag sack, I was already a nightmare. I was the shadow the heroes checked for under their beds, and the monster that villains prayed would never find them. The teachers freeze. Midnight looks at Aizawa, her eyes wide with a question he can't answer. I have seen empires rise and crumble into the sea while I wore this same face. Izuku continues, his red eyes glowing with the intensity of a dying star. I have executed thousands of final bosses before the concept of video game even existed. You aren't a player, Shigaraki. You are a footnote in a history book I've already finished reading. Shigaraki lunges forward, his hand outstretched, his face contorted in a mask of homicidal fury. I'll turn you into dust. I'll decay every second of your long life until there's nothing left. Try it, Izuku says, his tone bored once more. He looks down at Eri, who is watching with wide, curious eyes. Actually, honey, I think this big, ugly birdman behind him is scaring the students. Why don't you call for your friend? Lute jumps towards Izuku and landed beside him. Oh, so you're calling your masterpiece? At that question, Izuku smiled. Eri nods eagerly, stepping forward to the edge of the obsidian floor. She takes a deep breath, her cutesy voice ringing out through the facility. Eri-chan needs protection. Come and protect Eri-chan, pretty please, Maharaga-chan. The ground doesn't just shake, it ruptures. A towering, white-skinned titan rises behind her, the golden wheel behind its head spinning with a rhythmic clack-clack. Maharaga stands as a wall of divine muscle between the little girl and the League of Villains. Maharaga, Izuku commands, his gaze fixed on the stunned Shigaraki. The bird is first. Show them the difference between a barely functioning science project and my own masterpiece. So this was the end of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series. And if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.